Good morning and welcome to the Closers Inner Circle podcast with your host Denise Griffitts and Bengay the Third. Today, I'm really excited about this because we're not opening up the closers books. I am encouraging Ben to share his incredible journey with legendary figures in sales and personal development, including his mentorship with Dr. Napoleon Hill, who guided him for nearly 3 years. And Ben also worked alongside luminaries such as Earl Nightingale, and he forged a lasting friendship with Zig Ziglar at Holiday Magic, which is where they both began their careers. And as the author of the Closer series, which is sold, he told me, and I'm going to have to see if I can say this without biting my tongue, 10.5 million copies when they quit counting many years ago. Ben joins us to address the critical need for effective sales training, and his insights emphasize that success in sales is not just about techniques, but also about building strong, very strong personal relationships that last. So join us as we explore these powerful lessons and more. But today, it's all about stories. Ben, good morning. It's Wednesday, my favorite day of the week because I get to spend time with you.
Oh, that's sweet of you. And vice versa. Uh, Before we go forward, I may not have heard it right, but the count on the closers was 10.5 million when we quit counting 30 years ago. And that's just on the closers part one. Now we have the closers part two, three, four, five, six, etc.
Right, right.
So anyway, 10.5 million. I was away from the business for a few years. When I came back, they hadn't counted properly and they couldn't prove how many they'd bought and sold while I was gone. So I said, well, how far do you go? And they could prove 10.5 million. And as I said, that was 30 some odd years ago. So I said, good, that's impressive enough. Let's just cut it off there. Adding when we quit counting 30 years ago. So beyond that, it's speculation, but it's still a good selling book. If we cared about such things, we could say we were a bestseller even till today. So if you're in selling as a sales manager, salesperson, etc., make sure you and your people have the closers. It's called the Bible of the sales industry, the best-selling, most popular, most powerful books on selling and closing ever written. And the reason they're so powerful is they tell it the way selling really is, not the way we wish it was. The closers part one, especially, is politically incorrect in several places. So somebody said, well, you couldn't write that today. And I said, sure, I could. And I would, but I knew what they were talking about. It talks about racial relationships and how various groups, economic strata interact with each other, religions interact with each other, and so on. So there are times I had a guy write me one time who had just finished the closers and he said, thank you so much. Greatest book I ever read on selling and business, etc. And he said, I got several chapters deep in it and I got up and shut my office door. I didn't feel like I should be caught reading it because it gave me an unfair advantage over other people. And I said, I hope you don't mind. I just wrote that down. It will appear in advertising copy. And I think it's on the cover of one of the books somewhere. It gives you an unfair advantage. And that's pretty high praise for a sales book, I think. So, what would you like me to do? You want me to say, my favorite subject is me, so you want me to start it. I was born a poor black child and go forward.
No. Let's start with. See, now I have to sit down and think about that. I want you to share, you have some truly remarkable experiences with legendary figures in the personal development sales industry. Napoleon Hill, Earl Nightingale, Zig Ziglar. Who doesn't know who Zig Ziglar? Let me tell you my Zig Ziglar story very quickly. I'd never heard of him. And I was heading out to go to garage sales because my car wanted me to go to garage sales. It knew where to go. It just took me. I was just there along for the ride. And I found this little, I still have it. It's in my office closet. This little plastic binder, odd shape, and it was a nickel. And I opened it up, and I think there were six little, what do you call those? The things that you plug into your car. What do you call tapes?
Cassettes or,
Yeah, cassette tapes.
yeah.
And I mean, you can't hear them now. I can't find a way to listen to them, but they all said Zig Ziglar. And I said, what is a Zig Ziglar? I didn't know, but it was a nickel. I could afford it. So I jumped in my car. And at the time, this was a while back, I had a cassette player in the car and I was transfixed. I parked on two streets over from my house and I'm not sure I didn't run the gas out. I just kept listening and listening and listening. And from then on, I was absolutely hooked on Zig Ziglar.
Well, he would be thrilled to hear that. He was a neat guy,
Yeah.
and he could have been a stand-up lounge act in a nightclub doing comedy, and or a great philosopher telling stories. He and Hal Holbrook, who did Mark Twain, held a thing in common in that they were both wonderful storytellers. But he was just a wonderful gentleman. My Zig story, I have many, but my Zig story where I met him, I had I had married a lady who was going through nursing school. She's passed away now, Marcia. And I was making, I think, $100 a week plus a small amount of commissions from my father. This was in 1965. So I need to make more money. I didn't realize that nursing school didn't pay you, you paid them to stay in it. So I opened up the Atlanta Journal Constitution or whatever it was in those days. I think just the Atlanta Constitution. One day, as I came out of a grocery store, my father was a food broker, turned to the employment section and started looking for an additional job I could do. And I went down through, all the letters. I got to the P's. I wasn't a psychiatrist. I got to the S's. I wasn't a secretary. Uh, couldn't type. I had limited talents, to say the least. And just as I got ready to throw it in the trash can in disgust, I saw a little section, business opportunities. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'd never seen that section. I'd never looked at the want ads before. So I scanned down, and one of the first ones was a little ad. It said, if you know anything about marketing plans and want to make more money, dial this number. And so I went into a nearby phone booth. For your younger listeners, that's a big aluminum box that you walk into and shut the door. And when you make calls from it, it always sounded like you were calling from the inside of a garbage can. So I dialed the number, was connected to a gentleman named Bill Dempsey, who became a big deal in my life. And I began interviewing him because I was Ben Gay with Brown Gay Food Brokerage Company, skipping over the fact that Brown Gay was my father, not me. And I began interviewing him to see if he was qualified to talk to me. And 60 seconds in or something, Bill Dempsey said, "Excuse me, where are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm on the corner of Peachtree and West Peachtree, the Fork." He said, "You're about 2 blocks from my office. That's good news. Be standing in front of my desk in 10 minutes, or don't ever dial this number." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Mr. Gay, I'm not the man standing in a phone booth answering want ads." So I guess that sort of established our relationship.
I think he nailed you.
Yeah. So Jimmy Rucker, my running buddy, high school buddy, and the greatest salesperson I ever personally worked with, came around. He also worked for my father, and I jumped in the cars like Batman and Robin. I said, "Quick, 1447 Peachtree Street." And he said, "What's up?" And I said, "We're going to be rich." And the reason I felt that way was I didn't know what a one ad cost, but anybody would pay for a one ad, insult people who called and then hang up on them. I figured I had something going. So We skidded up to 1447 Peachtree Street. Didn't notice on the way into the underground parking garage that it was $3 or something if you didn't have your ticket validated by the Trust Company of Georgia. So we didn't bother to do that, and went up to suite 301, went skidding in up to the receptionist desk, and I said, "Hi, I'm Ben Gay. I have an appointment with Mr. Dempsey." And she said, "Oh, yes, we've been waiting for you." And but from behind me, I heard this thick Southern accent say, "Ben Gay." And I'm used to Ben Gay jokes, so I turned around, hand extended, and I said, "Yes, I'm Ben Gay. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm Zig Ziglar." And I said, "With a name like Zig Ziglar, you're making fun of Ben Gay? You got to be kidding." Well,
No kidding. Right.
Zig had answered the same ad that I did, and Dempsey only got two responses to that ad, which I found fascinating because he recruited who became the number one and number two distributors in the company with one ad and one interview. And Zig was number one sometimes. I was number one sometimes, but in a year-long sales contest, I beat him and I won the mystery prize, which turned out to be the presidency of the company. And but that was a year in the future. And I said to William Penpatrick, the owner of the company, when I went out to find out what I had won, what the mystery prize was, he said, "Well, it's president of the company." I said, "My God, what if somebody had won that you didn't like?" He said, "I would have changed the prize." So, which was sort of clever. I guess somebody else would have gotten a car. Second prize was Rolls Royce. Third prize was I think a Lincoln Continental. Fourth prize was a Ford Thunderbird, and then it descended into steak knives and desk sets and so on. So I dodged that bullet and went skidding in. So that's how I got started in the multi-level marketing business. It cost $91.41 to get started. And we turned that 91.41 into millions of dollars, traveled all over the world, met kings and queens and princes and princesses and so on. And the reason you and I are talking today, indirectly and several generations later, is because I picked up an Atlanta Journal or Atlanta Constitution one ad and answered a mildly insulting ad. By the way, I knew nothing about marketing plans. My only qualification was the second sentence: want to make more money. So Jimmy and I joined and didn't make any money for the first 6 months we were with the company. Went to the meetings 3 or 4 times a week, the Georgian Terrace Hotel on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, but we weren't doing anything. And so one day I walk into the meeting and there's Bill Dempsey, the guy who recruited me. Zig had gotten off to a pretty quick start. He was making money, and a lot of other people around me. So Dempsey says, "Mr. Gay, I need to see you." So I walked over. "Yes, sir. What's up?" He says, "I don't want you coming to the meetings anymore." Well, the only way you made money in Holiday Magic at the wholesale level, or at the executive level, the wholesale level, was bringing people to the meetings and signing them up and getting them to build a retail organization. And I said, "Well," and by that time we had $5,000 sunk into the program, and I'd made Jimmy Rucker sell his 1957 Chevrolet to raise about half of that money. A fact he is still bitter about all these years later.
Yeah,
Talk to him.
I would be too. In fact, I tell him that I understand his angst. I really do.
Every time I would go to a car show or something, I love to go to the old cars, the cars of my era. Judy, her eyes cross. I go, "Oh, there's a 51 Mercury, and my father had one," that type of thing. And but every time I go to a car show, there's 57 Chevrolets there, and I'm thinking I'm gonna buy Rucker one and send it to him just to shut him up, and it would be a great story. But now I look at the 57 Chevrolets, and we got a less than $2,500 for his. I don't remember how much less, but less. And today they're like 60,000. So if they're in good shape. So my enthusiasm for buying a Rucker 57 Chevrolet has faded a bit. So anyway, it
Just
turned
don't
out,
love him that much, I guess.
yeah, true.
Shame on you. You made him sell the love of his life, and you can't come up with $60,000 to replace it.
Well, I
I
have a
don't
lot of
know, Ben.
emotion. I have a lot of emotion for it, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah, that'll do it.
So anyway, I said, why can't we come to the meetings? Because that really wasn't an option. We're down $5,000 in today's money. That's 50,000. We're still making $100 a week with my father. So not coming to the meetings and not having an opportunity to make money was not an option. You would have read about a mass shooting or something if I had been barred from the meetings. But I said to Dempsey, why not? He said, well, it doesn't make any difference to you. You're not making any money. And the reason you're not making any money is you didn't learn the scripts I handed you the day I recruited you. Dempsey handed me two things. One, an old beat up record, Earl Nightingale's The Strangest Secret, which is right here on my desk. And he has, and then an old beat up copy of Think and Grow Rich by Dr. Napoleon Hill. I have a copy of that book on my desk signed by Hill, but it's not the one Dempsey gave me. Somebody stole that over the years. And he handed me a pile about a half an inch thick or whatever of scripts, and he told me to memorize them. One was how to invite somebody to a meeting. Uh, the other one was what to say when you got them to the meeting. The next one was the meeting. It was about a 37-minute word for word presentation that you gave to everybody. And then when the film was over, the film said, turn to the person who brought you here and ask how you can get started in Holiday Magic. Lights came back up, and you then said the scripts that went with the closes to get them to join the business. And I think there were 6 closes total. If they didn't buy on the first one, you went to the second one, et cetera. They didn't buy on the 6th one, you went home. But he said, so you haven't run the scripts, so you don't bring anybody, but people see you here night after night, so they assume you're doing well, making money in spite of that cheap sport coat you continue to wear. I'd gotten it at Robert Hall. I was very proud of it. And he said, so they call you. We had a rule of process. If you couldn't close the person you were with, you raise your hand, and somebody more experienced came over and close them for you or try to close them for you. So people would raise their hand and I would go over because I'm a nice guy and they saw me there all the time. And then I would attempt to close their people in spite of the fact I never brought anybody. I never closed anybody. I didn't know the scripts, etc. So not only was I doing nothing for myself, I'd probably blow out their prospects too. So looking back, I can see why Dempsey thought it was a losing proposition to have me at a meeting, or Rucker. He hadn't done it either. So I said, fine. What do I have to do to get back in? And he said, you have to memorize these scripts word for word, how to invite them, what to say when you get here, the meeting itself. Don't worry, you're not going to be doing that anytime soon, but you got to learn it anyway. And then the 6 closes after the meeting's over, word for word. When you can stand in front of my desk and do that, then you can come back to the meetings. So I'm guessing 10 days later or so, I called, went and stood in front of his desk and did it all, and as did Rucker. And he said, good, now you can come back to the meetings. I said, well, what do I do now? He said, here's an idea. Why don't you go talk to someone you don't know and say, give them the invitation to come to the meeting script? And I thought, oh, that's enlightening. No wonder I was supposed to learn that script. So I did. And the next night, or within a night or two, we walked in with 5 or 6 prospects, which was 5 or 6 more than we had brought in the previous 6 months. The film ended, turned to the person who brought you here. I went into the closes, and I'm quoting from memory, but I believe they all joined 100%. One may have had to go raise some money or something, which in time I had that wired. If you need to raise money, I had a contact at the Trust Company of Georgia, John Nash, who would finance anyone I sent to him. And he told me later, he said, Ben, I never lost a penny. Everyone you sent, I approved. Everyone you sent that I approved paid their loan. Now, we're not talking about a lot of money. It was $2,500, then another $2,500, 5,000 total. But again, back then, that was 25,000, a total of 50,000 in buying power. So I now knew the script, knew how to get people to the meeting, knew what to say to them afterwards. And within 30 days or so, was standing at the front of the room doing the meeting. And 37 minutes word for word, introduce the film, bring the lights back up, go sit at the table and close them. It was like a car wash system. It worked beautifully if you worked the system. And so we started bringing people in, and then I won a couple of little contests, the Southeastern contest, the Atlanta contest, whatever. Then I became Southeastern sales coordinator. I don't remember that paying anything, but it looked good on my business card. And continue to build our business. So we went from making nothing to making rather quickly 40,000 a month in 1966 dollars. That's about 440,000 a month today. Part-time, still working for my father. Side story, August 22nd of either 65 or 66, we're rolling, we're making money. We just bought a new Cadillac to impress people. And we're driving around during the daytime, calling on grocery stores in a brand new Cadillac. Looked a little odd, I'm sure. But on my birthday, August 22nd, Dad saw me walking by his office on the way out the door, and he said, "Ben, come here." So I walked in and said, "I want to talk to you for a minute. Is Rucker here?" And I said, "Yeah." So I went and got Rucker, came in, and Dad said, "As you know, gentlemen, we're having a birthday party for Ben tonight. And Rucker, I expect you'll be there 7 o'clock at the house. And but I wanted to get, since you two are sewn together at the hip, I thought I'd give you your birthday present also a little early. Rucker, is that okay?" "Oh, yes, sir." And Dad said, "You're both fired." And I said, "That's a birthday present?" He said, "You obviously don't have the nerve to quit. You're making 40,000 a month between the two of you part-time outside, and I'm paying you $100 a week plus a little commission. A smart person would have quit several months ago. I want you to quit now, and I'll make it easy for you. You're fired." So that was my birthday present. He also explained my trust to me at the time. He said, "I know you have that lean and hungry look people get when they think they're going to inherit stuff." He said, I know you'd like to inherit the food brokerage business, but I have a partner and he doesn't like you. So that isn't one of your options."
I've never
And
heard that before. How could he not like you?
don't know, but
Well, that's
somehow
just wrong.
he was not fond of me.
I'll be darned.
His name was Theron Brown. He's gone to his great reward now, but Theron was not fond of me. So uh, we were now fired. Oh, and he said, and as far as personal money from the trust account, he said, "You know, your mother and I have lived well. We belong to East Lake Country Club. We have nice cars. We travel. So there's not as much money left as you might think. And we have your sisters to split anything up with." She said, "Here's my trust company plan for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "You see that vending machine out there?" And it was, potato chips and candy bars. He said, "If I time it right, I'm going to die at work with my last quarter or nickel, whatever it was in those days, in my hand. I'm going to lunge into that candy machine. And if you're here, you get to pull the handle. And that's your inheritance." Now, are we clear? He said, "Clearer than we have ever been." So we got serious about holiday magic then. It became a full-time business, got an office, did all the things you do if you're a young person in business, and off we went. Shortly thereafter, they had a year-long sales contest. And I figured I've never been contest incentivized. I do the best I can every day. And if that wins something, wonderful. If it doesn't, I did the best I could every day. I learned that from my father. When they, in the food brokerage business, one of our clients insulted him at a meeting in New York by saying, "And now if you do this, we're going to send you a brand new color television," one of those console things with a record player in it that used to be all the rage. "We're going to send you one of those." And my father said, he and I are sitting there, And my father said, you can put that television where the sun doesn't shine. I do the best I can for you every day, all day. Have been doing that since I've been with you. If that wins a television set, wonderful. If it doesn't, wonderful. And we shook hands and left their suite at the Waldorf Astoria. And I'm saying, as we head down the hall, I said, Dad, did we just lose that account? He said, I don't think so. But he said, I also don't care. When we got back to Atlanta on the family house, I didn't live there anymore, but on the family house doorstep was a brand new television console, record player combo packed up with a note on it saying, Mr. Gay, we're sorry if we insulted you in any way. Please enjoy this token of our appreciation. And Dad just smiled and winked, and I learned a little bit about contests. So anyway, knowing we were probably doing okay, I would have guessed in the top 5, the contest ended, and I got a call from San Rafael, California, where Holiday Magic was based, and they said, you won the contest. You and Jimmy Rucker won the contest and the mystery prize. And I said, what's the mystery prize? They said, we can't tell you. You have to come see Mr. Patrick. He'll explain it to you. So flew to California, went to what became my favorite restaurant in Tiburon, California, the Caprice, met Bill Patrick. Again, I'd met him before. And I said, what's the mystery prize? He said, the presidency of the company. And as I told you earlier, what if somebody had won it that you didn't like? He said, that's the reason it was a mystery prize. I would have changed the prize. I'm not going to turn over the presidency to somebody I don't know and trust. And he said, that's you. Now I have a high school education, can't balance a checkbook, had never seen a P&L, profit and loss, had never seen a balance sheet, still don't understand how you can have $1 million in the bank, not owe anybody, and have the 2 columns balance at the bottom. That is still, after all these years in business, a mystery to me. And so I was unqualified to run a company that rather quickly was taking in $1 million a day, a little over 3 billion with a B in today's money. And I'm sitting there, you talk about imposter syndrome. Every time the front door or the door to my office opened, I thought, okay, this is it. This is where somebody comes in and says, we've been looking over your qualifications and you don't have any. The qualification I had, though, was I was good in front of groups. I spoke well. My family had raised me properly. I spoke at least reasonable English. I was a pretty good storyteller already, made it a practice becoming an excellent storyteller. And so I made up my other shortcomings. I hired people, or they were already hired to do the finances and the production and everything. And I was the front man. I went out front and sold. And if it was a really big meeting, dragged Bill Patrick in, and he did an inspirational talk, and pretty quick, $1 million a day was coming in. And again, that's in mid 60s dollars. So the imposter syndrome started to settle in because public speaking business, politics, it's been around forever, but the public speaking business sort of started in that era, led by a couple of people who, Cabot Robert was one of them, Bill Gold was one of them. Zig was in on the very beginning of it. He wasn't a big deal yet, and they're looking for big meetings to go to. Well, we were the hot game in town. We had every night at 7:59, your local time, somebody stepped to the front of the room in hundreds of places all over the United States and rather quickly Europe, South America, etc., and said in whatever language they were speaking in, good evening. My name is Ben Gay. I'm a general distributor with Holiday Magic Cosmetics. My pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special meeting, and on for 37 minutes. The only thing that changed was their name, the country, the language they were speaking, and then in time, the product they were talking about. We had 5 major, in time, we had 5 major companies using the same marketing plan. same markups and etc. But it was cosmetics, Holiday Magic Cosmetics, Stay Power, motor oil additives, Bob Cummings, vitamins, the old movie actor, uh, Ameriprise home care cleaning products sold to us by my father. It was a product I used to sell when I worked for him. We just relabeled it and sold it, and a tailor-made clothing company. But the meeting stayed the same. So through standardization, utter and complete standardization in everything that was said to anybody, we took what was a brand new company in 1964, drove it to $1 million a day, $3.5 billion in today's money, led by a guy who couldn't balance a checkbook, me. So, but the good news is because everybody that was anybody in the speaking business, Cabot Robert, Zig Ziglar, Bill Gove, Earl Nightingale, et cetera, wanted to get in front of a big group, and we had the big groups all over the country, to a degree, all over the world. And so they wanted to be our friend. And I was the guy in the catbird seat. If you wanted to stand in front of the room, you had to get me to approve you and to invite you to come. So that's how I met Earl Nightingale. That's how he became the voice of Holiday Magic and State Power and all the other companies. And now he was the voice of my companies long after Holiday Magic. Wonderful guy. I was thinking about him the other day. I always do, but the other day was December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day. My father said two horrible things happened to America on December 7th. One, Pearl Harbor. And I mentioned that with Earl because Earl was on the Arizona, the USS Arizona, when it was hit and sunk, and is now under that beautiful memorial in Pearl Harbor. He was one of, I think, 19 Marines on board. So we're an awful young country when you know somebody who was on the Arizona 80 some odd years ago at Pearl Harbor. And he introduced me, took me to lunch one day when we were his largest account, since we were buying records and training programs from him and so on. He said, I've got a friend I want you to meet. So we walked across, he was at 333 North Michigan Avenue. We walked across the street over the bridge, almost died, the wind coming off the lake, over the bridge to one of his favorite restaurants. And we walked in, and a guy stood to greet us who I didn't recognize, but he said, oh, I understand you're Ben Gay. And I knew instantly the voice. It was Paul Harvey. And they were Earl and Paul were friendly competitors, but behind the scenes, good friends. So that's how I met Paul Harvey, and he did some work with us, and Earl Nightingale, of course. Zig and I joined on the same day and both worked in Atlanta, so that was easy. Bill Gove was sort of the honorary chairman of the Wilson Learning Corporation as a favor to Larry Wilson. So I got to meet him there because we put our people through what was called sales sonics and then counselor selling. So Bill and Larry became good friends. And then it's sort of like network marketing. You know, this guy knows five people he introduces you to. This person was excited with the way he was treated. J. Douglas Edwards, the great sales trainer, I wrote a book for him after he died called Sales Closing Power. It's true to the notes, though, that I took from him attending the seminars and true to his recording. So when I say I wrote it, I typed it from my notes and his work. But J. Douglas Edwards came on board. Fred Herman, the great sales trainer from Cedartown, Georgia. Just about everybody that you could name of that era did at least some work for us. Dr. Norma Vincent Peale was a regular on our stages. Dr. Robert Schuler, who I later met at the Garden Grove Community Church, the Hour of Power. I met him through the church later, but he was working for us at Holiday Magic occasionally before that. So I stepped into just answered a little one ad, and less than a year later was knee deep in famous, successful people who had to get along with me because by accident, I was president of the company. So that's how we got our start in Holiday Magic. And oh, and back to when we pulled in and I didn't notice the parking fee, $3. As we went down to get out of the meeting, at the very first meeting with Bill Dempsey, we came around the corner to go up the ramp back out to Peachtree Street, and there stood a guy in his little booth with his hand out, wanting his $3, as the little sign said. Well, by coincidence, that was exactly $3 more than we had between us, Rucker and me. So we turned our heads to the right to the blank wall and drove past his outstretched hand as if we didn't see him. Went up the ramp a little too fast, bounced into Peachtree Street and took off and went home. Never parked in that parking lot again. I always parked on the street when I went back to see Dempsey for any reason, for fear the guy would, I could give him the $3 by then, but I was afraid he might still be mad at us. And so from humble beginnings, just about everything business-wise good in my life started the day I answered that ad. And I'm still trading on that. In fact, I talked to a gentleman this morning who I first met when I did a Holiday Magic opportunity meeting as a favor to a friend of mine. He couldn't make it. And I met this gentleman. His name is Nolan Bush. And I met Nolan one night in Jackson, Mississippi, at that meeting I was doing. And here we are, I guess, 60 years later, 65, 35, 45, yeah, almost 60 years later, and I'm still doing business with him. And there are lots of people like that. You talked about the nickel set of cassettes you bought of Zig Ziglar.
I
One of
will
my,
never get rid of those. They will live in that closet forever.
absolutely, keep them, and don't, no matter what the story, don't lend them out because you'll never see them
Yeah.
again.
Books, things like this. No, 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 no. You can sit right there and I'll watch you read it, but no, you're not taking it with you.
Exactly. That's how
I
come I
might
don't
even
have,
cook, but I'm not, I might feed you, but you're not taking my book.
that's how come I don't have the original copy Dempsey gave me of Think and Grow Rich. Somewhere along the line, some nice, sweet friend of mine must have said, do you mind if I take that and read it? And I said, yeah, never saw it again. That was the first book of any significance I ever lent out to anybody, and the
The
last book.
last. Yeah, I'm the same way. And I wanted to go back just a little bit because you're
Mhm.
talking about you won the prize. The second prize was a Rolls Royce, and
Right.
Zig got that, didn't he? Zig
Yeah.
Ziglar.
Yeah. And on bad days, if I happen to be talking to him, because he was 18 years old, Zig was in the Navy the day I was born. He was 18 years older than I was, but we really started September 15th, 1965 to get in a position to make serious money. We started together, but it was he was just a wonderful human being. And on bad days, if I was talking to him, he would say, I would say, Zig, I'm sorry I beat you in that contest. Here's the deal. Bring me the rolls with the keys, and I'll give you the keys to the front door, and you'll be president of Holiday Magic. He said, oh, no, you won that fair and square. So driving around in that car waving at people was a heck of a lot easier than running an international corporation that you weren't qualified to run.
And I've written down a couple of things. In fact, I wrote this one thing down twice, and Dr. Napoleon Hill, if you've read the books, and so many people say, oh, yeah, I've read the, no, you haven't. What
Yeah,
does it tell
exactly.
you?
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
it's got some great stuff in it. What does it tell you to do? Take action. But what I really want to know, and I think I know this story, how did Dr. Hill become part of your life? I mean, he was almost foisted on you, wasn't he? But why?
Yeah, it wasn't even a do you want? It was
Right, right.
here
Here
he
you
is.
go. Yeah, deal with it.
I was sitting in my big office at 616 Canal Street, San Rafael, California, and the dreaded knock on the door came. Bill was the only one that ever knocked, and that was a courtesy. It wasn't, can I come in? It was the I'm coming in knock. Anybody else had to go through Marty, my secretary, and she would have buzzed me or called me or something. So the dreaded knock and the fear of I've been discovered crossed my mind instantly. Door opens, and there stands Bill, 6'3" or 4", an imposing figure, and this little old man next to him leaning on a cane. And so I got up, being a Southerner, walked around my desk. It's a big conference table. Walked around my desk and I said, "Hi, I'm Ben Gay." And Bill looked at me like I was from Mars, as in, you don't know who this is. I'd never seen a picture of him. And it was Dr. Napoleon Hill. And I said, "I'm Ben Gay." And he said, Bill said, "Ben, this is Dr. Napoleon Hill." I said, "Oh, Dr. Hill, a pleasure to meet you." He said, "Call me Nappy." And that was the beginning of our first battle. One, he was old enough to be my great grandfather. I was 25, he was 84. Two, I'm a Southerner. You don't call people of your elders by nicknames. So I said, no, I'll call you Dr. Hill. No, call me Nappy. And we must have argued over that kiddingly 100 times over the next couple of 3 years, because I refused. I only said the word nappy after he was dead, and I was telling somebody the story. Prior to that, I wouldn't even utter the word. And I see people who on Facebook and various places referring to him as Mr. Hill, and sometimes Nappy, because they must have heard the story somewhere. And it still bothers me to this day. He sold more books, Think and Grow Rich, not counting all the others, more books. It was said that it was the second best-selling book in either the world or the country, second only to the Bible. When it's a person like that who's become saint-like in history, you don't call him Nappy. You call him Dr. Hill. You've seen things from me. I always refer to him as Dr. Hill, or if it's early in the paragraph, Dr. Napoleon Hill. So Bill brings him in, sits him down. He said, "I've asked Dr. Hill." He always said, "I know there must be times when you don't want to make the long walk." I had a big office at the front of the building, which was a long, narrower building. His was at the very back. "I know you don't want to make the long walk down that hallway to tell me bad news or ask me a question, the answer to which you should probably already know. So I've asked Dr. Hill to be your," I forget the term, "mentor, coach, whatever." We were starting a company called Mentoring Dynamics when he died, that he and I were going to be the head of. So it might have been mentor, but I think it was coach or friend. He hired me a great grandfather. And so he will be available to you. Fly him out here anytime you want. And Dr. Hill loved the Learjet. He made up excuses to have the Learjet pick him up in Columbia, South Carolina, and fly him to our airport near the office in San Rafael. So, or on the phone, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, he's available. And he said, "And you can tell him anything. It will never get back to me unless you tell me." And I looked at Dr. Hill and he nodded, like that's the deal. So I immediately, being me, tested the system. Within a meeting or two with Dr. Hill, I told him a story which wasn't true, but it was based on something that some other people in the company before I got there had tried to do. They tried a coup. They went to him and said, "Bill, there's 4 of us that started this thing. So we want 25% apiece, 75% of the company. You can have 25% and remain chairman of the board, and this will be just behind the scenes, but we want 75% of the company." So I won't bore you with the whole long story, but he shipped one of them. He agreed to it in theory, said, "We'll get the paperwork." But in the meantime, he sent one of them to Mexico to run the company there, one of them to Canada to run the company there, just to get everything in place, and then one to tour the world to see where else we should open up. So he went off on a worldwide tour. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, Bill got all the legal work in place and fired all three of them. And that was the end of the coup.
Seen that
So I,
coming.
and
I
he
mean,
would,
sir, they didn't see that coming.
no, I guess not. I wasn't in the meeting, but
That's crazy.
and he had them all up to the house, uh, and he had a big home in Tiburon on top of the hill in Marin County. I had them all up to the house, and I didn't go to that meeting either because I was not yet part of the corporate home office. But they said they walked in. You came in at the top of the living room and stepped down 3 or 4 steps, and there was the living room and dining room. They all walked in, and there sat Bill at the head of this long table, dinner plates set out and everything, and most of the home office staff sitting there with dishes in front of them. And they looked around. They didn't know there was going to be a big meeting. And Bill said, "Gentlemen, welcome to the Last Supper," and shipped them off and then fired them. Bill always said, "Get them, float them out over the horizon where nobody can see them, and then sink them." So that's what he did, but apparently they didn't know that story. So I told Dr. Hill that 4 of us who were really running the company were going to do a coup, and I laid out that whole story. Dr. Hill had never heard it, didn't know anything about it. And Bill would get mad telling the story several years after it happened. I mean, veins at the neck and red in the face and so on. So I knew if Dr. Hill went to him and told him that story, he would be down the hall like he was on roller skates to get to me. Nothing happened, nothing happened. But if something had happened, I wrote a letter to him and had Marion McGinnis, his secretary, put it in her desk. She sat right outside his office. And I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember, but the gist of it was, "Bill, you've heard that we're going to overthrow the company. That's not true. It was a test of my relationship and the honest relationship with Dr. Hill." And I figured he'd tell you, and he did. And that's the reason you're now so upset. It isn't happening. Didn't happen then, isn't happening now. Years later, I left the company. A couple of years after that, the company went under. At some point, I wasn't there. I assumed they hauled furniture out of the bankrupt company's home office. And in it, within that shipment, would have been Marion McGinnis's desk. And I'm confident in that desk was the letter I had given. I had it sealed in the art department with wax, with those old fashioned wax seals, so that it would be really dramatic if it happened, but it never happened. I was able to tell Dr. Hill anything. And our second, since we're on Dr. Hill, our second argument was cute. It was our first lunch together at a little restaurant near the home office. And we're sitting there out in the sun on the back deck. And Dr. chit chatting about stuff. And then Dr. Hill put his fork in his salad and was lifting the salad up to his mouth. And he said, "And remember, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve." And he went to stick it in his mouth. And I said, "Unless they're crazy." And he froze. He said, "What?" I said, "Unless they're crazy. I can believe I'm Napoleon. That doesn't make me Napoleon. That's not a really good statement or whatever." He said, "It's the backbone of Think and Grow Rich." I said, "I don't care what it's the backbone of. It's crazy. Uh, Perhaps the next time you write it," and of course the conversation went on for a couple hours and then we talked about it other times. But I said, "The next time you rewrite it or revise it, say whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve ... unless it's crazy." And he finally laughed and said, "All right." He didn't do it, but all right, he got my point. So we had a wonderful relationship, grandfatherly, sometimes deadly serious. He stayed up at the house whenever he was in town. I thought of him this Saturday, and you know this story. I was trimming my toenails, which I do every 6 weeks. And the reason is, one day I'm sitting out on the side deck at the house overlooking San Francisco Bay, and Dr. Hill comes shuffling out in his bathrobe with a cup of coffee. And I said, "Hi, Dr. Hill, how are you?" He said, "I'm fine. What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trimming my toenails. They were cutting into my socks and hurting." So how often do you trim them? I said, "I don't know, whenever they need them." He said, "Oh, we found the problem. The problem is there is a length of time when they need trimming after they've been trimmed. When was the last time?" And blah, blah, blah. We settled on, I think it was 6 weeks to start with. It's gone up and down as I've aged and things grow less rapidly than they used to. But last Saturday, I was trimming my toenails. And because it was on my calendar in the daily success system, he helped me set up for every aspect of my life. And uh, I smiled because it's trim toenails dash move up 6 weeks. And that's a little tiny nugget of all the millions of things Dr. Hill ran past me. Oh, and he was paid $50,000 the first year. And I knew that. It wasn't discussed with me, but I knew that. I was president of the company. So the check crossed my desk later that day, $50,000 for consulting or something, but it was with me. And at the end of the first year, he began hinting that he would like to carry on. I hadn't really thought about it. And I wanted him to carry on, but I hadn't thought about the financial details. So after he'd hinted several times, I went down to Bill's office and I said, "Dr. Hill's hinting that he would like to go forward, which I assume means another $50,000. What was your deal?" He said, "My deal was 1 year. If you want him for a second year, it's on you." So later that day, I wrote a personal check to him for $50,000 for the second year. And I believe, I can't prove this, I believe the Napoleon Hill Foundation owes me some money because I'm sure I paid him for the third year and he died early in the third year of our relationship. So I don't want to look maudlin. It's been 54 years since he passed, but I think they owe me money, probably
You
about
know,
25,000.
one of the things that I always get kind of a kersnorkel over, if anybody knows what a kersnorkel is, you're ahead of
Mhm.
me, but it's basically a snorkel and a cough. You're just making this involuntary sound. And every time I think about you telling me that you guys are going to do, this, you had this program you were going to launch, and I'll never forget. And you said, and then he died on me. And I lose it every time I hear your voice in my head. And then he went and died on me. You were
How,
so offended by
how inconsiderate is that?
right, right. You know what I've been wanting to ask you, and I'm pretty sure I do not have the answer for this as much as we've talked and chatted over the years. What I don't know, and I'm really curious to know, is what did you know about Dr. Napoleon Hill before he appeared in your doorway?
I knew about the book. Everybody in the self-improvement
Right,
industry knew
right.
about it, and Bill Dempsey handed me my first copy at about 1 o'clock, September 5th, Wednesday, September 15th, 1965. So I knew that, and I had read it, skimmed it might be a more truthful thing, but I had read it shortly thereafter, within a week of it having been given to me. Fast forward a few years, now he's working for me, staying at the house, and we walk into the living room the first day he was there, and there on the coffee table, Marcia, first wife, had put a copy of Think and Grow Rich angled towards the hallway you came down and went in. In other words, it had become the dominant, in spite of all the furniture, grandfather clocks and all. When you walked in that room, the first thing you would have seen is Think and Grow Rich. And I thought to myself, God, that was cheesy, Marcia. It made it look like I was claiming we sat around every night cross-legged on the floor and discussed his book. So with it in front of me, I said, "Oh, look, Dr. Hill, a copy of Think and Grow Rich." And he said, "Oh, yes, that's very nice." I said, "How does it feel to have written?" Back then, they used to say it was second only to the Bible in sales. I don't know if that was true then or now, but it was a huge seller, tens of millions of copies sold. I said, "How does it feel to have written one of the best-selling books in history?" He said, "Ben, best-selling, least read." He knew that if you were in selling or self-improvement or whatever, self-development industry, you had to have a copy of Think and Grow Rich. But he said, I can talk to somebody for about 5 minutes, know whether they've ever read it or not. And rarely do I meet anyone who has any deep understanding of it. And as you alluded to earlier, Dr. Hill said, they're all looking for the secret in Think and Grow Rich. He said, first of all, understand it was written as a sales training manual. I
That's
didn't
the
write
part that blew me away. The first time you told me that, I
that.
just said, "Say that again?" I had no idea. Okay, say it slower now.
Sales training manual. That's who he thought the market was. He said, I never intended to be this psychological deep study. I wrote it for salespeople. And the message they keep missing is take action.
That's
He said, that's
exactly
it.
right. And
Yeah.
you did when you saw that ad. You didn't
Yeah.
even know Dr. Hill at that point, but you
No.
took action.
Yeah.
Now, did you follow up that action with doing what you were supposed to do? No, but eventually you got smacked around
I got forced into it.
sufficiently, right? You got smacked around sufficiently. You said, okay, fine, I'll do what I'm supposed to do.
I'll
But
memorize a stupid script.
yeah, and I have to tell you, and we talk about this too, and we'll probably talk about this next week. Scripts, they're so important.
Yep.
And I script everything. I mean, everything I have. And people say, well, yeah, Denise, they're listening to you. They're listening to you and me on our podcast, and podcast. They're listening to me on my other one. And people are shocked when I admit that I have scripted myself to death.
Sure.
But I have
And
to. It's the only way to keep me honest.
it doesn't have to be the 37-minute presentation.
No,
That's
no.
separate. Uh, unique in that, hello, I'm now going to talk for a while and you're not going to talk. You're an audience, I'm the speaker. That's different. The rest of everything that I talk about when I'm talking about scripting is what I call script chunks. If you ask me
Uh, hmm
about something, if you ask me about Bill Gove, one of the great speakers of our time, I have 2 or 3 Bill Gove stories I would tell you, and I would tell them to you word for the word, the way that I always tell them. You and I have been talking this morning for about an hour now, a couple of minutes past an hour. Everything that I have said to you, it came like Hal Holbrook and Mark Twain. It may not have been in the same order because I had to respond to your questions. But when I told you about getting the Atlanta Constitution out of the rack and going into the phone booth, I have told that story word for word that way thousands of times. When I talk about walking into Bill Dempsey's office, hi, I'm Ben Gay. Ben Gay, and then in a deep Southern accent behind me, I heard, Ben Gay. Hi, I'm Ben Gay. Who are you? I'm Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar with a name like this. See what I mean? That's word for word what I told you 25 minutes ago. And it'll be word for word the next time I tell it, because like in direct mail, you look for the best way to explain something that gets the best result, and you test it, maybe do a little adjusting, but once you nail it, that it's done. That is the scripted way I say that. So although I might have used 30 script chunks while we were talking for the first hour, each one of them was word for word the way I always tell it. And it keeps you honest, keeps you on track. And assuming you're selling a worthy product or service, it's good for the customer, the prospect, because they get the clearest indication of the way to do it. A great example, if you've been in selling over 30 days, you've probably gotten a letter from the Wall Street Journal, and it says, uh, in the beginning, I don't have a copy in front of me, but 25 years ago on a bright sunny day, 2 men as it was, graduated from college, and it goes on. Today, one of them is the chairman of the board, the other one is stuck in middle management at the same company. And it goes on to talk about, well, that's been so effective. That's their control piece. That's their written, scripted presentation as to why you should read the Wall Street Journal. And of course, the implication is the chairman of the board read the Wall Street Journal every day, where the guy stuck in middle management didn't. It was so good, they copyrighted it, trademarked it. And if you write a sales letter, and I got one the other day, and I sent it back to the guy because I sort of know him, he's an acquaintance. I said, you're going to get your rear end sued if this falls into the hands of some member of the Wall Street Journal team. What you just claimed as yours is copyrighted and scripted. And I don't copyright and script most of what I say or do, but
Right.
it's the same thing. I have found the best way to tell the Nightingale story is this. The best way to tell the Napoleon Hill story is this. The best way to tell how I won the sales contest and flew out to the home office to be named president of the company, et cetera, is this. And once you settle in on the effective way to do it, why would you mess with it? Why would the Wall Street Journal, to pick my street, I think there's 50 homes in our development, for lack of a better word, and send 50 different letters to people to try and get them to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal? If they're smart, they would find the most effective letter they have. And the one I just paraphrased from is almost 50 years old since they've changed a word in it. And they mail other letters to try and beat it. They always want a better control piece, but in 50 years they haven't found one. So they keep mailing the same thing. I keep saying the same thing about my books, about our mentoring program, about everything that we offer and do. So test it, revise it, test it again, revise it again. The first three uh, words that I learned that they are the first three words in direct marketing, direct mail, and one-on-one selling is test. Number two is test. Number three is test. And once they've cleared those three hurdles, lock them in. Unless something changes about the product or the company or the whatever, or some scandal or whatever, don't mess with it.
And I've been writing the whole time you've been talking. You talked about the scripts that you had to learn
Mhm,
reluctantly, but once
mhm.
you learned them, you took off running. The closer scripts, the closing scripts at Holiday Magic. And that led me to wonder, I'm pretty sure you wrote the closers after Napoleon Hill had passed away.
Yeah,
And
rewrote the closers.
right, the first
Yeah.
one, we'll talk about that next week because that's an important part of your story too. But the closers, I mean, clearly just that title, the closers, that's very important to you.
It's my passport to credibility.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I've got many speaking engagements, many consulting deals uh, as a result of the closers. And in the beginning, the original publisher of the closers of the horrible first edition, they ran one ad one day in the Wall Street Journal and sold one copy to me. So I got the rights to it, rewrote it, and turned it into the best-selling sales training book of all time. So you got to know how to sell. And the way we sold the closers was we developed scripts to explain it. They sold one, we've sold millions.
The closers, or did it have a different title?
No, it was called the closers. Now it's the
Okay,
closers part one. The
right.
original book is now part one, and then two, three, etc. But the original uh, book was just called the closers. I, I saw a little ad in the Wall Street Journal. I've had two little ads have major impacts on my life. One is Join Holiday Magic. The other one was Buy the Closers. The reason I sent a marketing letter to them was we'll talk about it next week. I had just begun the worldwide toll-free call center industry with the National Communications Center. And we needed clients who would put an 800 number in their ads and then pay us for the calls we took. So I clipped out that ad, again, a little bitty ad, not to buy a book. I wasn't sure it was a book. I just saw the word closers in it. Uh, I clipped out that little ad to get them to put our 800 number in their ad. And Then I saw they were selling something $14.95, so I put my check in with it. If they had never sent it to me, I never would have thought about it again, never would have tried to get my $14.95 back or whatever it was. It was just a secondary thought while sending down a typing request to the word processing department to start the letter series to them about why they ought to have an 800 number. When I started the National Communications Center, something like 90% of all Americans did not know an 800 number was free to them. Wasn't free to anybody else, but free to them. So I had to
Yeah.
educate the population. And then what I did was from my timeshare industry experience in the timeshare vacation ownership industry, where I was doing a lot of sales training, I took a one expensive unit and broke it down. Back then, to have a toll-free number, it was $10,000 a month upfront, which got you 240 hours. At the end of the month, you got a new bill for $10,000 and overtime if you had any from the month before. And if you didn't use your 240 hours, they just went away. So nobody could afford an 800 number unless you were a huge company. In fact, Xerox and people like that, who are also clients of mine for different reasons, they only used 800 numbers to transmit computer data late at night. No one was dialing them up and trying to order things. So we created an industry and then when you dialed the 800 number, from my direct mail experience, everybody dialed the same 800 number. So we were sharing an 800 number. And near the end of my involvement with that business, we were taking 86,000 phone calls a day. And every one of them was answered with a script. We wrote scripts for every new client. They weren't really long and involved, but hi, thank you very much for calling. May I have the extension number in the ad you're looking at? Uh, 512. Super. Back then, before we had computers on every desk, they had a big thing looked like a Sears catalog. They turned to page 515 and said, "Hi, this is operator 515 with Xerox. I've been asked to take your blah, 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 blah," and read the script, took the call, hung up, and took the next call. So that was scripted. I had 1,500 different companies at any given time, having 86,000 people call us, and every call was answered by script. So when people say
W-
to me, "Well, I don't like script, I like to
Yeah.
wing it," what I
You
say to
better
myself,
learn. You
yeah,
better
what I
learn.
say to myself is, "God, you didn't look that stupid when I first met you."
I don't know if I shared this with you or not. Our friend Tammy Thrasher, I was doing they she wanted me to come on her podcast, which as you know, I'm never on the other side of the mic. So I said, "All right, but you know me. You know I don't have any filters. I'm warning you." But it turned out well, I think. But I was kind of mentoring them. You see, and I was talking about the scripts and both of them said, "You don't sound like you're scripted at all." So what I did was I took the script that I had just used for the podcast the day before and I sent it to them and then they listened to the actual podcast. And while I use my script and I ask the questions that are in there, I don't ask them the way they're written. I
Mhm.
use it as kind of a tagline, just touch point here, touch point there. And she said, "I would have never guessed that you were that scripted." I said, "I have to be. It's an hour-long conversation. It is all about my guest. And if I don't know what the heck I'm asking for, God only knows what you're going to get at the end of it." But,
Absolutely.
she said, "Wow, you make it sound so natural." Well, because it is. I've been doing it for so long and I keep that script handy, like, and I've said it before to keep me honest, to keep me on point.
It's a very intelligent way to operate. And
Yeah.
um, but it requires discipline and it requires people doing things they don't want to do, like study, memorize, test. But the difference between the big money earner and the little money earner in any given company, same product, same pricing, same everything. Only difference is the salesperson is one knows what they're doing. They're sales infiltrators. The other one doesn't know what they're doing. And they just sort of my closing rate I brag about all the time is 86% since I started keeping track
I
years ago
know.
of significant sales, not I want to buy a book. I would only count it if you called to order a book and wound up buying 500 books. That counts. Anything else is just order taking. But 86%. But the closing rate at the National Communication Center, with at any given time probably 50 people on the floor taking calls, was 100%. There were two differences. One, effective marketing that made the person call to start with. Incoming calls are easier than outgoing cold calls. And the other one was every word they uttered was scripted. They were reading it smoothly, efficiently, beautifully, but it was scripted. And if you got off script, you were canned. One warning, I think it was, then you're still off script. Thank you very much. Get your pocketbook.
We are out of time. Listen, I love this conversation and I'm really looking forward to next week because you have such tremendous history in the sales Bibles, the closers, the sales Bibles. But honestly, your stories are, I don't even know how to say this without kind of just sounding like a fangirl, but I am a fangirl. I'm very much a fan of yours. And I love to hear your stories. I mean, they're historical in some ways. They're amazing in so many ways, and I just love to hear them. So we're going to continue on next week. But before we say goodbye, I'm going to thank everybody for being with us each week. And if you have questions or if you have any questions at all, get in touch with me, get in touch with Ben. And by the way, Christmas stockings, get these books, The Closers, Part 1 and Part 2. Put them on Christmas stockings. They belong, in my opinion, and my opinion is very important. They belong, just so you know, they belong in every entrepreneurial library. We all have one. If we're business people, if we're solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, salespeople, we have a library. These books belong in that library. So, Ben, I will see you next week, same time, same place.
All right. Really enjoyed it. As I said, I love to talk about me. So I look forward to next week too.
Me too. All right. Well, I'll talk with you next week.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.